Hi, Pashtana.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No, as I've just said to you, it is an absolute privilege to have you on the Women Ed Book Club. So much so that it's taken us a while to get here, but I think determination and willpower has definitely got us here. We will share your biography with the Women Ed members, and we'll send a link to all of our members as well for your book. I wholeheartedly suggest everybody read Pashtana's story because, yeah, I have said to you, inspiring isn't the word. It just doesn't seem enough of a word to describe the story. Um, but yeah, thank you for sharing it, and I can't wait to listen to your answers to some of the questions. So the first one being, you start the book with your mother's advice to you about for girls to gain respect in Afghanistan, they need to study. But then, and I'm going to have to read the quote. You then, reading on in your book, you say you describe the entire modern history of Afghanistan being seen as one long armed and violent argument about whether or not girls should be educated. So, on one hand, you've got your mother saying you must study to gain respect. And then on a wider scale, there's this dissonance about whether girls in general should be educated. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And also, do you feel that still is the case, or has it, considering global issues and such like, has it changed in any way through the work that you've been doing?
I think it's with different lenses, and I definitely do see I see the practicality in it when I hear my mom's advice, and this has been advice not only to me, to every person, every other person who grew up in a place which was gender challenged. I wouldn't say gender inequality because in many ways you are equal, but in many ways you are not equal. But it's challenged. So if you are a woman, for you to be able to go out, you need to have a job. But if you have to have a job, you need to be educated for it, you know? So the first step goes back again to being educated. So I think diversity is not just to be respected, it was for you to have freedom, for you to go outside, for you to have a purpose, you have to have education. But then most importantly, I think my mother saw, and my parents, and I think any person saw education as the one way to be respected outside of your home in a space that is not necessarily someone related to you, but they will respect you because you're in a position of authority, in a position of, that space that requires respect, So in one, and there would be consequences if you're disrespected or in one way or the other, or somebody behaves badly or something of that sort. So I think the practicality of it, I see it, yes. But then at the same time, if you look at Afghan history, I like glorifying and romanticizing Afghan history as much as I can. And the modern Afghan history it shows that in 1919, we had women who could vote while the West was still struggling to, accept the idea of voting women. We had a women education minister and all of that. But then at the same time, they also lost power because of that, because so much what was being informed in constitution and everything was not being reflected in the reality of the regions, or at least it was being challenged in a different narrative. So I don't want to completely romanticize it or completely dismiss everything that happened, but at the same time I do feel like any place, any country, I think, including the US and the Western hemisphere, you have to be educated, you have to be in certain space for you to have that authority, for you to have that space, and for you to feel equal in many ways, and for you to access those equal rights that you're supposed to access anyways, but you're normally given access when you have those qualifications. So I
Yeah,
think he was trying to give me a more practical pathway rather than giving me a philosophy about it. And I respect that, I understand that, but I hope we don't have to do that in the future for our
yeah,
girls,
yeah,
where we have to justify their education and where we have to justify that they're worthy of respect only if they have a certain qualification. I think every human being is worthy of respect, and I think young girls have as much as right as anyone else to be in those spaces and be educated and have access to all those things. Yeah.
absolutely. And that comes through loud and clear in the work that you're doing. Um, One of the interesting quotes that I've picked out next for us to discuss is, I'm thinking about it contextually. explain how you came to the realization. So on page 45, when we're sort of learning more about your understanding of the injustice that is there, because I think the way that you were brought up was very different to what you would describe as an Afghan girl's upbringing. But this idea, this realization that you had that lack of education wasn't a byproduct of poverty, it was a weapon, and denying girls in particular was a deliberate thing. And this idea as well that as you became more aware of this and you then were advocating for girls' education, it made you an equal opportunities offender, which I find as a brilliant, brilliant turn of phrase. Can you just explain a bit more about how you came to that realization for the people watching?
I think because one thing that I realized when I went back to Afghanistan and just in general, even when we were in camp, and I used to see this like people didn't need a lot of justification when it came to boys' education. It was just understood, oh, the boy has to go because he has to earn and he has to take care of everyone. And then girls were left out of that because they have to get married and we don't want to invest in it. And that was sort of this poverty cycle that was sort of not built, but sort of enforced. And that mentality was just there. And what would she do with getting, like, what is the use of it? And I think one thing that we tend to ignore a lot in Afghan spaces or settings is you have to be useful in one way or the other. And I think it applies to all the people all around the world. So how do you get useful if you're not going to school? You're married off because then you're doing somebody else's work and stuff like that. And that is being useful. So I think for me, challenging that was very important. That was the first
Mm.
thing. But then at the same time, the sort of mentality that is enforced on us, oh, what is the use of education for her? It has to be, I think we had to take a step back with that. So all those things, but then most importantly, apart from all of this, the bigger picture was rural people don't want education for their girls. Rural people are uneducated. They live in the mountains. They abide the Taliban. They accept the Taliban. They have given them spaces. They don't care about girls' education as much. But then there were parents, and there are still parents who still reach out from those spaces and still educate their daughters, and they believe in that. And that's what challenges the whole narrative of this sort of thing that was enforced on us. And I still believe that it is enforced on us by the Taliban and people who think like the Taliban, that, oh, in poverty, you have to choose. And if you have to choose the boy and the girl doesn't, there is no use for her. And then when you say, oh, no, there is use for her, when she gets educated, she can become a doctor or something like that. Then they're like, oh, no, religion says don't. So like they have to justify all of this. And then it's weaponized and politicized in many ways, because the more educated your woman is, the more educated and liberated your family, your children, and your nation is. And I think that's where they're scared of it. So it sort of
Yeah.
is not just the poverty aspect of it, it's philosophy aspect of it. It's a liberated nation that they are scared of, that they cannot
Mm.
scare with religion anymore.
I think that's really interesting. You touch on that in the sense that they're using religion as a way to, because it doesn't say it. Yeah, and I think that's always been an interesting thing for me in religion, in the sense that it's all about interpretation, and how it's been interpreted is then being used to align with a philosophy or a way of thinking, rather than what the actual scripture is
Yeah,
teaching us and sharing with us. And that's really interesting. I think you're being very brave by saying that as well. So which we know you are. Coming back to that idea then about sort of like families in the mountains and things like that, and you've touched on it a little bit in the fact that there are some that are wanting to educate their girls, and there was a beautiful, hopeful statement about you sharing the idea that tribal values can evolve too. And based on your story so far, do you believe that if tribal values can evolve, as you've said that they do, and you've given examples within your story, do you think there's ever going to be a time where the idea of advocating for girls' education isn't a political thing anymore? It's just it won't be a thing anymore. It will, is that, do you think that is something that might happen? I'm being very idealistic here, I know, but
I believe, I don't even want to say idealistic, I believe that there is a time where tribal values will embed education and girls' education as one of their core values, which will be practiced and believed in and worshipped within those spaces, because sooner rather than later, everybody's going to realize that you cannot just survive this world on your own and fighting through it. Some people
Yeah.
have to live through it, and majority of people want to live through it, especially young children, men, young girls, women, people who are done with the war, people who are done with politics, people who just want to live. And when you have to live, you need to have a doctor, you need to have a teacher, you
Yeah.
have someone who can fix your water pump, you need someone who can fix your car. And for all of that, you need to go to school. And for them to go to school, they have to end up in a college and stuff like that. So living requires that idealistic approach of believing and embedding education as a core belief and value. And I do know that tribal values have evolved so much. I mean, I'm going to give you an example of my own grandfather.
Mhm.
My grandfather was a misogynist and patriarchal, and that's one of the reasons he's not mentioned in my book at all. My paternal grandfather, and he sort of fought against the Soviets. And then when he became extremely old, even then he was extremely misogynist, and his goal was to make sure that women in the family were controlled either by being married off early on, or sort of, oh, if you do say this, somebody's gonna get married the second time on you, so even when my grandmother was used to talk or raise her opinions and stuff like that, he just got married the second time. So sort of controlling through misogyny and
Mhm.
patriarchy. But then my father, when he married my mother, for 8 years, they couldn't have a boy, and the whole world forced my father to have another woman, or marry another woman and have children from her. And he would say no, you know
Mhm.
and he had two daughters, and he was very happy about it. So
Mhm.
if so much can change in just the course of 40, 50 years, I do think there's a lot that can change. Like, a misogynist father had a very feminist son, and
Mhm.
then his
Yeah.
son had me, which is extremely feminist woman. So, and my brother, who's in a completely different scenario, he believes in girls' education, women's education. He's interning with us right now, and he literally goes back and forth and tells me, oh, this is wrong. This is, by the way, should be corrected. And this is how you should be talking to people and stuff like that. And he sort of comes back and forth on oh, this should be more innovative. He tries to challenge all those ideas and ideologies and everything. And majority of the guys that I work with that are not even related to me are working in this sector with 30 women, and they're all boys who grew up in Afghanistan in rural tribal South. So
Right.
it's sort of, I think, opens up this whole dialogue of times have changed, times
Mhm.
up, and
Mhm.
you can always have that sort of dialogue, but it's not this, the values have completely changed and shifted, but also have expanded into accepting women as part of the society, but also their education being as important as a boy's education.
Well, equal, it's equal really, isn't it? And I think the one thing that I've noticed with education is that it can sometimes still be quite gendered. So when I think about the STEM science spaces within our country and how we need more women in those spaces because we need a diverse workforce, um, do you think it will ever get to that stage where you're having to debate about subjects and disciplines and things like that? So you get to a stage where it's a given, they'll have an education, you won't need to fight for it, and it'll be more about what does our community need and which girls do we want in on these courses. Do you think it will get to that point?
I do believe we're already there in many ways. I mean,
A little bit,
we
yeah.
like uh, our Afghan robotics team is the leading team. They have won so many championships throughout the world. They literally created ventilators out of car engines and stuff like that. And that's very innovative given
Yeah.
Central Asian and Middle Eastern context. But then at the same time, there are schools all over Afghanistan right now that are innovating and teaching through digital literacy and all of that. So I do think in many contexts we are already there, but in many contexts, the only thing that we have is our uncertainty. That just is like a dark shadow following us. Because as Afghans, as much as bloodshed, as much as loss of life we have seen, I think we're extremely hopeful people because we still continue to hope and believe in life.
Yeah.
And that is fascinating to see that you could still
Mm.
do that. Because I think any nation who would go through something that we went through for 20 years and 40 years, by the way, now, would be completely broken and like,
Mm.
traumatized and destroyed. But even now, you see Afghan women protesting, you see Afghan girls showing up to schools, and you see people challenging that narrative. So I think it's quite different from what the whole world is. We not only have those debates on who should end up where, I think we are much better. We're like, everybody should end up in that space.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know what's interesting? I wonder whether that is the perception outside in looking in on Afghanistan, because I think there is still a lot of work to do. And I think hearing the Taliban being in control, there's almost that perception of we need to do more because the girls aren't getting educated. And that I don't think we can take away from that reality in the sense that it's not where it should be because they are in control. So hearing you speak so hopefully about it is, I think, amazing. I think that's amazing. And I believe, I'm sure the women ed community will be reading your story because I think reading your story, yeah, you will, there's no reason not to believe it. Um, I want to go into that idea about that you mentioned earlier about that idea of being useful and when you get educated, you become or perceived as useful. And I'm not going to give the full context to this story because people will need to read your book. Page 117, you were meeting with a tribal leader from the Kandahar province, and it was to do with establishing yourself and what you wanted to do in terms of girls and education. And he asked you a very specific question: why would girls need to be educated? And it was a fair question. And the way that you described your response was fantastic in the sense that you understood where he was coming from. And when you answered this provocation, you referenced religion as well as describing the cultural, societal, familial value of educating women. And I just want to touch on that. Where does religion end and culture begin, or where does culture end and religion begin? Because the fact is, this is me, I think it's my personal opinion. I don't feel religion should have come into the answer because that's got nothing to do with educating a human being. And so I find that interesting that you chose to use religion as one of your reasons. But where do you see religion ending, culture begin, culture? Because, yeah, that's more of a provocation for me, really. How
I
did you
think that's a
feel?
fair question. I think that is a fair question, and I would understand like if, and I like as a researcher, I always have that question. I'm like, why would you want to justify it through that? Why
Mm,
don't you have a strong ground on your own?
mm,
Like why can't you challenge it, or why can't you come up with an answer on your own? Or do you
mm.
need from religion or culture? But I think the
Yeah.
one thing I've learned, um, being a tribal woman is the fact that um, you always have to have shared values. You have to have shared code of conduct. And that's where religion does play an important role. It's an umbrella that overshadows everything else. And then there's culture, that is the second layer of it. And I think for me, it's very important when I meet someone like that, it's I have to show that I'm not challenging the way he thinks, but I am trying to meet him where he is.
Mm,
And that's where religion comes into play because that's what he believes in. And he has to be given a justification based on his belief system. And I think that was very important for me. And then the same time, culture, because that's what he has lived in, that's what he has seen. And because
mm,
the place you're talking about is Daman, and there was no electricity, there were no roads. It was a Taliban controlled area. And later on, we got to know that it was sort of a ruse. I was sent to that place because, like, they thought I would go missing or something of that sort. So, but this man, he made the best landi out there, which is like this dried meat dish. And he invited me and he ate and had lunch with me. All the women in his house came and greeted me and talked to me, and how we hung out. So this sort of shows that he might not have accepted what I believed in, but
mm,
he me as his daughter
mhm.
or someone like that. And even at that point, he like sort of protected me from the Taliban because it was a Taliban controlled territory. So it was fair for me, or at least it would have been just to give him at least the justification that would require him for me to be there, in the first place. So
Yeah.
I use sort of come up with this understanding of religion and culture and do that and share that value and belief with him, because he shared his family, his belief, his system with me. So I had
Yeah.
to run in the same way. And then also, I think to your question of where does it end and the other begins, I think they have to live in harmony, especially when it comes to countries like Afghanistan. It has to be in harmony. I think right now the Taliban are using religion against culture and
Mm,
even weaponizing culture in many ways. But that's not the reality of Afghanistan. In ancient Afghanistan and modern Afghanistan, um, there are people like Taliban, which we can pick from history even.
yeah.
But there are also people like us or better than us who have been challenging the narrative all along for centuries. So I think now is the time we understand that they have to go hand in hand and in harmony. Religion does say that girls have to be in school, and it
Mm,
does justify that girls access to education, because we're the only Muslim country whose regime leaders think differently doesn't mean
mm,
that that is the justification. And then the second way is, in the past 300 years of Afghanistan, if you find from the ruler's daughter, Ahmad Shah's daughter, she was educated. She used to write poetry. We just named our fifth school Aisha Durrani Maktab in Herat, which is dedicated to the first educated queen of Afghanistan before Malika Suraya, like the modern Afghanistan time. But even before her, she was educated and she wrote poetry. There's a book she has written, which is in the museum in Kabul. So the reason we do this, and the reason I believe that religion and culture have to go hand in hand, all these women that I just talked about, Aisha Durrani, or like Nazuana or Zorgonana, extremely religious women,
yeah.
extremely religious women, still extremely educated women, extremely
Yeah.
educated. So there are women, I mean, it's funny, but also at the same time, there are women in my family and in my community who still recite poetry by all these women. But then at the same time, they pray 5 times a day, they recite the Quran, and they go on about their day, but they also support their daughters to go to school. So there is no, they don't have to pick and choose. They do it in harmony and they feel at peace about it. So who am I, or who is the Taliban to differentiate, or put that cut between it? I think there's a lot of harmony. We just have to challenge the current narrative about it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Thank you for that answer. Um, now I really loved this next question actually. And I want to touch on the fact that you're sharing that some of your schools are named after powerful, educated Afghan religious women. But let me go to that question first, actually. So you referenced several women within your story, several heroines, I would call them. So Malala, Queen Soraya, Aisha, Durrani, Dodana, the Lion King girl, the other Pashtana. What I absolutely loved about it was that you were highlighting the strength of women sort of believing in something, but also with the other Pashtana, obviously her life turned out very differently to yours, we assume, in the sense that she got married off very, very young. But just the honesty in the way that you describe them, and you go back to that idea of it always comes back to education with you. And I think what's lovely with the story that you shared was that you were giving a range of examples of girls throughout their lifetime and how education has impacted them positively, and then what can happen in the case of the other Pashtana when it's taken away from them. I mean, the story about the Lion King girl, I don't know if you would like to share that one, because that one was that's a beautiful example of the power of education and almost a full circle moment for you.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, with Pashtana, being a spiteful kid, I always hated on her and everything of that sort. But even the other day when I was talking to my mom and she came up in our talks, and I was thinking to myself, and we were talking, and I was like, what a horrible fate. What a horrible fate. And nobody knows, like there's no follow-up to that story. And even if there is a follow-up story, it's going to be heartbreaking in many ways. And there's a little hope that it might have turned out for the better. But then at the same time, I think when I started getting in the space of being an educator and working with girls, I I don't want to learn to become this place where it's going to be there for the next 50 years or 100 years, or it's that institution that is there. No, I want it to do so much work that it's not needed in the next 50 years or 10 years or whatever, right? Like I want to work myself out of that job and move on to next thing, you know. And I think the Lion King girl was the first glimmer of hope that yes, it is possible. And there are going to be girls that we educate that are going to become maybe the president of Afghanistan, maybe who are going to be artists, who are going to build amazing buildings, who are going to be scientists, who are maybe going to cure cancer and stuff like that. Maybe they will be world-renowned journalists and all of that. And I believe that, I still do. And then at the same time, I do think that that is our only hope. That is our only safe way out of this chaotic space, you know. And I had a lot of space, you know, I had a lot of growth, I had a lot of support. But then at the same time, I want to make sure everyone else has the same thing, or at least a reflection of that. So Logan is supposed to be doing that, but of course the Lion King girl was just the exception. Not, I wouldn't say exception, but the first acceptance towards the bigger goal, which is like, you know, having educated girls all around the world. I don't care what uncertainty we are in, what war we are in, because war are made by men and I cannot control that part of it. But the one thing I can control is to ensure that what lessons we learned in Afghanistan, we can contribute and, like, you know, share those within spaces like Yemen, Syria, Iraq, anywhere and everywhere, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that does move on to my next question, in the sense that you found the answer to this question? So it's a very big one, but how do you safeguard education from fate?
I think
Have you
I
found the answer?
I think it's a work in progress. There are some times where I'm like, Eureka, I got the answer and it's there and I'm done and everything. But then the second day I wake up and I have like 10 messages which says, oh, we're under surveillance. We might have to shut down the school and we have to move on to some other place. We might not be able to do this. The number of the girls have dropped out. We are missing a teacher and she has not responded. Stuff like that. So, you know, it's never, I'm such a organized, like a geek when it comes to, I need stability, I need answers, I need to know where I'm going, I need to know how my week ends. You know, I like predictability, you know, and I love probability. But the more I love that part of it, the more opposite my work is to it. So there are times when like, you know, people when they talk about 5 years goal and everything, I don't do that anymore. I'm like, that's not how it works with us, because
Yeah.
one day you have 100 students, the other day you have 550 students, and you just have to get used to it and you have to be open about it and accept it. So I think now I have learned be as flexible as possible,
Mm.
be as open and receiving as possible. Even the harder times in some way are supposed to, like, you know, teach you something that is going to help you in the future. So just be open-minded about it. I think that, I know it sounds as cheesy and as vague as possible, but be as open about your challenges that come your way as you're open to, like, you know, success or happiness. Because in many ways that is going to build you to be happy. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Pashtana. Now, what I find really hopeful and beautiful is that the names printed in your story, because you share yours, but you share lots of different stories within it. It really does exemplify your passion, and it confirms. I think what was lovely is that women, as we know, have been written out of history, but it exemplified the passion and the purpose that is behind your work. And I just wanted, so we're ending now, so we've only got 5 minutes left, but I just wanted you to end sort of in terms of, I want to sort of showcase this passion that you have for education. So those that haven't read your book and will be reading your book, what would you say it would give them by reading it? Because for me, it gave me that, just that beautiful feeling that you've written those girls' names into existence, and that's a legacy in itself, that they were there and they existed and they did something in this world. What would you say about your book?
I think there are two aspects to that. One is the book is the love letter to Afghanistan, as my friend put it. I love Afghanistan and I'm always going to be in love with Afghanistan, and I don't need any more validation from someone else. I think the book in itself is the greatest validation I will give myself to write to Afghanistan and have this love letter be out there that
Mm,
it's a daughter of this country that loved this country so much. So it's a little selfish, but it's out of love. The second thing is, I think I truly believe that the women of Afghanistan need to be known more than being brave and resilient. We're as smart, we're as goofy, as funny, as intelligent. As possible out there, and we live life and we hope and we dream and we show up for everything, and it's important to be held witness to that and
mm,
know that we did our part even if the world didn't show up for us. And I think it was very important for me to name all these girls, because as a feminist and as a woman who believes that we have been written out of the history so much and we have been challenged with our identity as a rural tribal woman, it's very important to mention all those women who
yeah,
fought so much for me to be here. My grandmother, my own mother, Pashtana, Nurbibi, every one of them fought
yeah,
so. So I think both of that. I think this book is not only dedicated to them, but to the daughters of Afghanistan in general, you know?
definitely. And it's definitely a book of hope. And I think
Yeah.
the work that you're doing with Learn Afghanistan as well. I have followed you on Twitter. It's incredible. It's incredible work that you do. And Pashtana, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much that we finally found a way to meet, firstly, and secondly, for your time. Is there anything else that you would like to say to finish?
Thank you so much, first of all, for making the time and reading the book and for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I really hope people who are reading this book can find the strength that they seek, because I think as a woman, I used to read other women to find the strength that I was seeking. And I hope I'm able to give that back to our community. Yeah.
Absolutely. Pashtana, thank you so, so much. It has been wonderful speaking to you. I'm going to reference the book and everything else, and a link to your book as well. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.